Speak, O Lord, as we come to you to receive the food of your holy word.
Good morning, everybody. I want to welcome you to our program. So glad to have you on here. We're going to continue through our reading. We just read Habakkuk chapter 1, and today we're going to read Habakkuk 2. We're going to continue our study throughout this. It's one of my favorite prophets because it's different than all the other prophets. It's kind of like Jonah in a sense. But Habakkuk is more of a conversation between God and this prophet. The prophet has a concern, and so he brings it before God, and God responds, and the prophet responds back. And now God is responding back to him, and there's just such encouraging things for us to think about as we go through here. Good morning. Hey, CJ, how we doing, brother? Good to see you. Good to hear from you. All right, so we're in Habakkuk chapter 2. So I want to encourage you to turn over there with me, open up your Bibles with me. We're going to read Habakkuk 2. And remember, Habakkuk is looking around the world, his culture around him, and he basically says, hey, God, why aren't you doing anything? There's wickedness and violence, and there's injustice, and there's all kinds of awful things going on in the culture. God, do something about this. And God really responds in chapter 2, or responds in chapter 1, and he says, well, if I told you, you wouldn't understand. You wouldn't even believe me if I told you. And eventually he tells him, he says, I'm raising up Babylon to come and discipline and punish my people. And Habakkuk responds back and basically says, well, I'd liked it when you weren't doing anything. And how can you use such wicked people to punish your own people? They're worse than we are. How can you use such people? Well, God is the ruler of the universe. He can use anybody that he wants. And that's exactly what he was going to do. Good. Glad you're doing well, CJ. So let's go ahead and read together. We're going to keep reading. The very end of chapter 2. Habakkuk responds back to God and he says, I will stand my watch. Actually, I think it's up here. So he says, I will stand my watch and set myself on the rampart and watch to see what he will say to me and what I will answer when I am corrected. And so Habakkuk knows he's going to be corrected, but he's just not sure how God's going to respond, exactly what God's going to say. So we're going to begin right there in verse 2. We're going to see the Lord's response back to Habakkuk. So Habakkuk 2, verse 2, let's read what it says. It says, Then the Lord answered me and said, Write the vision and make it plain on tablets, that he may run who reads it. For the vision is yet for an appointed time, but at the end it will speak, and it will not lie. Though it tarries, wait for it, because it will surely come, and it will not tarry. Behold the proud, his soul is not upright in him, because the just shall live by faith. Look down at verse 5. It says, Indeed, because he transgresses by wine, he is a proud man, and does not stay at home, because he enlarges his desire as hell. And he is like death and cannot be satisfied. He gathers to himself all nations, and he heaps up for himself all peoples. Look at verse 6. He says, Will not all these take up a proverb against him, and taunting riddle against him, and say, Woe to him who increases what is not his. How long? And to him who loads himself with many plagues, will not your creditors rise up suddenly? Will they not awaken who oppress you? And you will become their booty. Look down at verse 8 with me. He says, Because you have plundered many nations, all the remnants of the people shall plunder you, because of man's blood and the violence of the land and the city and all who dwell in it. In verse 9, Woe to him who covets evil gain for his house, that he may set his nest on high, that he may be delivered from the power of distress. Sorry, I'm a little distracted. I'm trying to focus here. He said that he may be delivered from the power of distress, from the power of disaster. And you give shameful counsel to your house, cutting off many peoples and sin against your soul. For the stone will cry out from the wall, and the beam from the timbers will answer it. Woe to him who builds a town with bloodshed, who establishes a city with iniquity. Look at verse 13 with me. Well, let me get back to verse 13. There it is. Verse 13 with me. He says, behold, is it not of the Lord of hosts that the peoples labor to feed the fire, and nations weary themselves in vain? For the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord, as the waters cover the sea. Woe to him who gives drink to his neighbor, pressing him to your bottle, even to make him drunk, that you may look on his nakedness. And you are filled with shame instead of glory. You also drink and be exposed as uncircumcised. The cup of the Lord's right hand will be turned against you, and utter shame will be on your glory. Look down at verse 17 with me. He says, for the violence done to Lebanon will cover you, and the plunder of the beast which made them afraid, because of man's blood, and the violence of the land and of the city, and of all who dwell in it. Verse 18, what profit is the image, that its maker should carve it, and the molden image, a teacher of lies, that the maker of its mold shall trust in it, to make mute idols? Woe to him who says to the wood, awake, to silent stone, arise, it shall teach. Behold, it is overlaid with gold and silver, and yet in it there is no breath at all. Down in verse 20, he says, but the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silent before him. All right, so let's just go through and talk about some of the things that we see in the text. You're welcome to comment down below. I'll try to look at your comments as I go through here to be able to see some of the things we're looking at. Look in verse 2. See, God is going to answer Habakkuk here, and this is the entire chapter that he's going to answer. But he wanted Habakkuk to write this down because it wasn't just something for him to know. It was something for all of us to grasp, for all of the nation to understand. And so look at verse 3 with me. He says, for the vision is yet for an appointed time, and at the end of it will speak, and it will not lie, though it tarries, wait for it. And he says, look, it may look like it's going to fail. It may look like it's never going to happen, but it won't. Its timing is going to be absolutely perfect. Looks like it's delayed, but it's not really delayed. And from the Lord's perspective, it is the perfect timing for everything. It reminds me of 2 Peter chapter 3, where it says to the Lord, 1,000 years is a day, and a day is 1,000 years. And it says that the Lord is not slack concerning his promises. The Lord keeps his promises, but he does it on his own timetable. And we may not understand the timetable. We may not like the timetable, but the Lord does it in his own time. And we just got to learn to trust that. So in verse 4, look what he says. Here's his answer to Habakkuk here. He says, the proud man's soul is not right. And he's going to be punished by God. When we don't humble ourselves, God's going to humble us. And look down at verse 4. He says, behold the proud, his soul is not upright with him, but the just shall live by faith. And so what does he say about the just man? Well, he lives by faith. Now, sometimes we don't already see it, and we just have to trust God. We have to have faith in God. God is the one who runs the universe, and because of that, we've got to learn to trust that God knows what is best. So we got to learn to trust him. When God says, we can trust him, we can trust him. God doesn't tell us every detail of everything that he's going to do, and he's not obligated to do that. And so for us, as those who are his created, we just got to learn to trust him in these things. Look at verse 5 with me. In verse 5, here's what the proud, wicked man does. Look what he does. It says, because he's transgressed by wine, he is a proud man, and he does not stay at home. And so he gets drunk. He's just focused on self-indulgence and what he gets out of everything. He is arrogant. He's rash. He's into everybody's business. He doesn't stay at home. He destroys, he just desires wickedness and sin, and he's always wanting more. And, he's heaping up treasures for himself here on this earth. He's a man who trusts himself. He doesn't trust God. He trusts himself. And that's what a proud man does. And so really the description here is this picture power and splendor. And so who's he talking about? He's probably talking about Babylon, I think, in the context. These are people who plunder and they gain riches unjustly. They take captives for their own. So look down at verse 6. This is the second section. Well, there's two sections primarily, 2 through 5, and then 6 to the end of the end of this chapter. And what this section is going to be marked by is 5 woes in the text, really 5 judgments of God. And what woe means is that punishment is coming. And so what does God do to wicked nations? Well, he punishes them. He doesn't allow them to get away with it. They're not always going to set back and God's going to let them keep doing what they're doing. Sin does not go unpunished, and that's what we're going to see in this text. And so he's talking about some of the principles by which he operates the universe. God ultimately demands righteousness and justice, and God punishes wickedness. He's going to do that with Judah, and he's going to do that with Babylon. God punishes those who are wicked. So look down at verse 6 with me. Look at who God punishes. He says, will not all these take up a proverb against him and taunting riddle against him and say, here's our first woe. Woe to him who increases of what is not his. And this is a man who makes himself rich by taking things that don't belong to him. He's exploiting other people. And what happens when somebody unjustly increases his own gain? Well, notice in the text, the table's going to be turned on him. He's going to be the one who's looted. His creditors are going to rise up and they're going to take everything from him. He's going to become everybody's booty. It's just, he's going to reap what he sows. And he gives us the reason down in the last part of verse 8. Notice there's 2 because. In verse 8, he says, because you have plundered many nations, because of men's blood and the violence of the land and the city and all who dwell in it. And so he reaps what he sows. He's going to get back what he gave. A nation that exploits others for their own selfish gain, they're going to be punished. And so who's the wicked nation? I think it may be Babylon. I think that's who he's talking about. He could be talking about Judah and Habakkuk's concern for Judah, but both of these nations are going to end up being punished. That's basically what he said about Babylon back in chapter 1. That's basically what he said about Judah back in chapter 1. So look down at verse 9 with me. In verse 9, we have another woe. Woe to him who covets evil gain for his house, that he may set his nest on high and that he may be delivered from the power of disaster. And so here's a man who covets, he's greedy, and he's greedy for his own house. And what does he do with it? He sets it up high so that he could be delivered, so that he could be protected. He's putting himself up on high to protect himself from destruction. And what's going to happen to that nation? Well, verse 10, that nation's going to be cut off. They're sinning and they're going to get their due reward. In verse 11, eventually the house itself will turn up against him, because he says, for the stones will cry out, for the beams, timbers will answer it. The empire that was built for security by unjust gains is going to end up gone. It's going to end up, just being absolutely leveled and collapsing. That's exactly what is going to happen, or did happen to Babylon in the end. Just like with any other nation, with any other person who unjustly gains for themselves. And see, what we're trying to learn here is that God opposes injustice. And so don't think that nations or that people are getting away with it, because they're not. They're going to be punished. Even if it's the final judgment, people will be punished for unjust gain. So look down at verse 12 with me. Another woe. We have the third woe in the text. And so who's being punished here? Well, look, woe to him who builds a town with bloodshed, who establishes a city by iniquity. Whoever's building their nation by violence and bloodshed and sin. God's going to ultimately punish them. They're not going to get away with it. It may look like they are, but they're not. And he's going to hold them. He's going to hold them accountable. He's going to hold their feet to the fire. In verse 14, in the end, what's going to happen? Well, verse 14, it says, let's look. Everything it declares the glory of God. And when God punishes a nation like Babylon, like Judah, like any other nation for stuff like that, it shows the greatness and the glory of God. Now, in verse 17, thank you, brother. I appreciate it. You're welcome to chime in if you want. Let's keep going. Look down at verse 15 with me. Oh, go back up to verse 15. Look at verse 15. We have the fourth woe of the text. And so who's God going to punish? Look at verse 15. He says, woe to him who gives drink to his neighbor, press. Sorry, I guess we cut out for a second. I think we're back, but we cut out for just a second. I don't know if I think it's the idea that they're trying just to enjoy their impure state, trying to get others to do wrong so that they can take advantage of them. Maybe it's for their own pleasure. Maybe it's because, can you hear me? Hey, CJ, can you hear me? I will pause in case. Okay. All right. There we are. I don't know what's going on. Sometimes this internet just kind of gets a little shaky. Look at verse 15 with me again. We see another woe. And who's the woe? Who is God going to judge here? Well, these are people. Let's just read verse 15. He says, woe to him who gives drink to his neighbor, pressing him to your bottle, even to make him drunk, that you may look on his nakedness. So here's somebody that's trying to take advantage of or manipulate somebody for their own gain. They're trying to strip away all their honor from them. He's giving alcohol to his neighbor, gets him drunk. Why? So that they can look on their nakedness, so that they could see their shame. Trying to get other people to do wrong so that maybe they can take advantage of them, or they can feel better about themselves, or for their own pleasure, or whatever reason that they have to do that. Look down at verse 16. In verse 16, who's going to, this is what he says, you'll be filled with shame instead of glory. You also drink and be exposed as uncircumcised. The cup of the Lord's right hand will be turned against you, and utter shame will be upon your glory. And so here's somebody who is disgraced and somebody who is shamed. They're going to get drunk and they're going to be exposed themselves. What they were trying to do to somebody else is exactly what the Lord is going to do to them. And notice this phrase, the cup of the Lord. And that's the idea of God's wrath. God's going to give them this cup. They're going to drink it, and he's going to strip them of all of their honor. He's going to get them drunk, and God's going to strip them and destroy them. That's the picture of God's cup of wrath here. Now, in verse 17, let's look down at verse 17. In verse 17, he says, for the violence done in Lebanon will cover you, and the plunder of the beast made them afraid because of man's blood, and the violence of the land and of the city and of all who dwell in it. He's talking a lot about the violence that was done in Lebanon. Maybe this is talking about Babylon and their overcoming Lebanon. And so in the last part of verse 17, he says the exact same thing that he said back in verse 8, the last part of verse 8. He's trying to tie all this together. And look at verse 19. We're going to find the last woe. And this is applying to those who are idol worshipers. And so, where's the value of the idol in verse 18? He says, what profit is the image? And its maker should carve it, and the molded image, and a teacher of lies, the maker of its mold should trust in it to make these mute idols. Where's the value in the idol? Well, it's in the lies of the idol. They think that there's some God in this statue somehow. Just something that they've bowed down to worship to. Well, he says it's a lie. It's just not true. It's like just a figment of their imagination. They're making it up as they go. And how dumb is it anyways? What's the idol worshiper doing here? And he's telling it to wake up, get up, and it's not doing it. And how stupid is it to think that some totem pole is going to teach you something? Go down to verse 20 with me. Go down to verse 20. In verse 20, I really love this verse. But let's read it one more time. It says, "But the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silent before him." Now think about the context of what's going on here. There's violence. There's injustice. People taking things that don't belong to them. There's people who are trying to get people drunk and dishonor them. There's all kinds of chaotic, just sinful things going on all over the place, whether that's Judah or whether that's in Babylon, all over the place. And he talks about God being in his temple. Think about the contrast between the lifeless, breathless idol, that can't get up. It's dead. There's no breath. There's no life in it at all. Nothing without life should ever be an object of worship or should ever take priority in our lives. But think about the contrast between this statue that is overlaid with gold and silver, and you tell it to wake up and get up and it can't do anything at all. But the one true God, the one true God, you've got to keep silent before it. You're the one that becomes mute. You're the one that needs to be silent before God. Think about in contrast to chapter 2. Think about in contrast to Habakkuk's question that he's asking here. Look, how could you do this? How could you use such a wicked and awful nation as the Babylonians to come and punish our nation? They're worse than we are. And ultimately, God is on his throne. He's the one who rules over all of the world, including all of the nations, even the wicked ones he rules over. Listen, we can question God. We can come and say, God, why are you doing this? How can you do this? We can ask those kinds of questions. But when God answers back, the only thing that we can do is really keep silent before him and listen to what he says and trust him. Someone uses this sometimes to say that we need to be silent as we go to the church building. But really, he's talking about how we all need to be reverently silent before God in our lives and have faith and trust God in the end. We may not understand. We may not grasp why or how God is doing certain things. But in the end, we got to trust him. We just got to know that God knows better than we do. I really love this section of scripture. I love all of Habakkuk. It's so great. There's so much for us to learn. When we just don't understand why things are happening and what God is going to do about it, we got to step back and realize that God is working in ways we're not going to understand. And even if we have questions about that, ultimately, God is in his throne, and we've got to keep silent before him. I appreciate your time, appreciate your attention today. Hopefully that's helpful for you. And it's not something that you just kind of put away, but it's something that you take out and you read for yourself and you think about it and meditate on it and realize how important this is for us to learn to trust God. Appreciate your time. Hope everybody has a great rest of their day. God bless everybody.